Hello, and welcome to the 26th Annual Get Lit Festival. I'm Kate Peterson, Director of Get Lit Programs, a nonprofit organization housed within Eastern Washington University in Spokane. Our program is responsible for Get Lit, Washington State's longest-running annual literary festival, which hosts readings, writing workshops, craft classes, panel discussions, and much more, featuring many talented writers from our region and beyond. The festival takes place this Thursday through Sunday, April 11th through the 14th, in many venues across Spokane and Cheney. And of course, we're very happy to be back with you in this virtual space as well. You can find a full schedule of events along with information about all of our festival authors by visiting our website, getlitfestival.org. Now I'd like to introduce Get Lit's Assistant Coordinator, Liz Graves, who will tell us about today's event.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Social Justice and the Braided Memoir. Today, Jennifer Lunden, who goes by Lunden, and Sofia Ali-Khan will read from their work and discuss the socio-political, personal, scientific, and historical intersections contained in the Braided Memoir. The conversation will examine the health hazards of industrial capitalism through a social justice lens. Lunden and Sofia believe that the only way to adequately convey the breadth and complexity of issues of social justice is through braided memoir, which intertwines many threads of research told from the subjective personal point of view, engaging heart and mind together to catalyze social change. Kate and I will now introduce both Lunden and Sofia, and then we will pass the event over to them. Sofia Ali-Khan is a powerful anti-racist storyteller and an accomplished social justice lawyer. Her book, A Good Country, My Life in 12 Towns and the Devastating Battle for a White America, won the 2023 Nautilus Gold Book Award for Social Justice. Writing at the intersection of politics, race, history, and Muslim America, Sofia's essays have appeared in the Los Angeles Times, Time Magazine, the Chicago Tribune, and other publications. She has appeared as a featured storyteller on the Moth's main stage and at the Manhattan Public Theater's Seriously Entertaining series. She lives in Ontario with her family, where she is at work on her first novel with the generous support of the Canada Council for the Arts.
And Jennifer Lunden is the author of American Breakdown, which received a glowing review in the Washington Post and was called a genre-bending masterpiece by Hippocampus magazine. Lunden's work has been published in Creative Nonfiction, LitHub, The Progressive, Sweet, Peacock Journal, and many others. She is presented at the University of Southern Maine's Stone Coast MFA program, Emory College's Center for the Study of Human Health, the University of New England, and many more. A licensed clinical social worker and former therapist, in 2012, Lunden was named Maine's Social Worker of the Year. She and her husband, the artist Frank Turek, live in a little house in Portland, Maine, where they keep several backyard chickens, 2 cats, 1 Great Dane, and some gloriously untamed gardens. Lunden will begin the event with a short reading from her book, American Breakdown. Please welcome Lunden.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for those introductions. And I feel like the best way to introduce American Breakdown is just to read from the first 3 pages, which really give a sense of how this book came to be and what it promises. So the first chapter is called Bankruptcy. I imagine her in the summer of 1862, swimming with friends off the coast of Newport, all of them laughing and teasing, splashing around, showing off, the things young people did in the water in the mid-19th century and still do. They've swum out beyond the surf and the water is calm and warm, and for a moment, perhaps, Alice James feels free. She is 13, on the cusp of young womanhood and all its accompanying constraints. The water sparkles in the sunshine, rippling around her body. Does she swim the breaststroke to protect her hair? Does she float on her back and look up at the vast blue sky? Or does she dive down deep, eyes open, reveling in a world so different from the one above the surface? Looking back, almost 30 years later, Alice wrote in her diary of that vanished girl, lamenting her blank youthful mind, ignorant of catastrophe. I was 26 years old when I first laid eyes on the gold spine of Jean Strauss's Alice James, a biography, and pulled it down from the shelf. I'd heard about Alice. We had something in common. We'd both been felled by a mysterious fatigue. The book is fragile now. Oh, look, I can give you a visual. While I read. The book is fragile now. Its cover barely holds on to the spine, and some of the pages are falling out, and most of them bear some kinds of markings. Inside, I see the price, $2.50, still penciled inside the front cover. Someone else had owned the book before me. When I bought it, I took a purple pen to her name, crossed it out, and wrote my own and the year, 1994. I'd been sick for 5 years. I didn't know then that the book was treasure in my hands. It would become my company, my work, my healing. At the time, I was the living caretaker of a 1789 historic house museum in Maine, its substantial perennial garden laid out in measured decorum inside a white picket fence. When I think now of that garden, I see it bursting in the violent bloom of high summer, stands of white liatris spiking the azure sky, gold rudbeckia 6 feet tall and toppling, aphids on the helianthus, mold on the phlox, weeds overwhelming all the back beds. The garden was too much for me. From the bedroom window on the second floor, I could see the explosion of color, a carnival of red, yellow, purple, and pink. But I rarely looked down upon the garden from the bedroom window, because what I saw more than anything, even from that vantage, was my failure to keep up. For me, the garden was something to be contended with, when I should have been weeding it, taming it, saving it from itself. Instead, I lay in bed, in the cool of the oscillating fan, reading about my dead bed comrade, Alice James. In Alice, I met my Victorian counterpart, my kindred spirit, and somehow reading about her, bright, witty, proud, and stuck, I began coming unstuck. Why was Alice sick? Why was I? From my bed and with the aid of interlibrary loan and a helpful librarian, I set out on a journey to find some answers. I spent years researching American history, 19th century and contemporary toxicology, biology, medical history, economics, environmental history, sociology, chaos theory, and more. And by the time I finished, things were a whole lot clearer. 99 years before I was born, Alice collapsed. She was 19 years old in 1868, 2 years younger than I would be when illness took me under. Her eldest brother, William, had just given up preparations for a career in medicine and was floundering toward his destiny as the father of American psychology. Henry, who would become one of America's most celebrated authors, had just seen his first story in print. Her brothers, Wilkie and Bob, were pursuing their own career opportunities 3 years after surviving Civil War combat. All her siblings suffered intermittently with perplexing pains and debilitations. But Alice, from that point on, spent most of her life in bed with nothing to commend her to posterity but a private diary she didn't even begin to write until many years later. Alice had fallen victim to a mysterious epidemic that was sweeping the country. Its symptoms were not fatal, but left sufferers in a state that sometimes felt closer to death than to life. The hallmark of the illness was an inexplicable, incapacitating fatigue that sent many, like Alice, to their beds. Almost no bodily system was spared. Victims endured headaches, insomnia, digestive problems, chronic pain, anxiety, inability to concentrate, and vertigo. They sank into dark depressions. Physicians were at a loss to produce an effective treatment. In 1869, esteemed neurologist George Beard gave this diverse set of symptoms a name, neurasthenia. For 40 years, the illness wreaked havoc throughout the country. Then, as mysteriously as it arrived, it seemed to drop off the face of the planet. Or maybe it didn't. So thank you. That's a little introduction to American Breakdown. And now we get to hear Sofia give us a little reading from A Good Country. I have to ask, can you guys hear my cat yowling? Oh, thank goodness. Okay,
No,
that'll
not
make
at
it
all.
easier for me to ignore.
Well, I just want to say that I've actually heard you read that selection before, and it's never not gorgeous.
Oh, thank
It's
you.
so breathtaking what you've done. And what I love is that the braiding is clear, even at the precision and the beauty of the braiding is clear, even in that first snippet. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to read just a couple of minutes from the introduction of A Good Country. And then I'll fill in a couple of the gaps, a couple of the key pieces of information that might be helpful for you to know beyond that reading for the rest of our discussion. So this is a reading from A Good Country, My Life in 12 Towns and the Devastating Battle for a White America. On December 7th, 2015, I sat on a rocker in my preschooler's shared room, scrolling through the news while waiting for them to fall asleep, under a blanket to dim the light from my screen. 5 days before, there had been a mass shooting in San Bernardino, California, during which 14 people were killed and 22 were injured. The shooters were a married Muslim couple, thought to have been politically radicalized by overseas organizations. It was the deadliest mass shooting since Sandy Hook Elementary School. The nation reeled and American Muslims took cover. In the post-9/11 politics of our country, an act of violence by any Muslim was broadly attributed to us all and to Islam itself. We were expected to, and many of us did, respond by publicly condemning the attacks, seeing no way to reject collective culpability and still convey our horror at what had happened. We had no way of saying, we are not them. We should not be held accountable for their actions. Over the preceding 14 years, the social space to assert this basic principle of human rights had all but disappeared for American Muslims. Under my blanket, my laptop pinged with a message from Cynthia, an old college friend living in Wisconsin. How can I help? She wanted to know. By then, Trump was the leading contender for the Republican presidential nomination and had called for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. The message was clear that Muslims were the problem, not lack of gun control, not extremism, not a society without proper mental health access. Heart full, I walked down to the kitchen, composing a letter in my head. Dear non-Muslim allies, it began. I'm writing to you because it has gotten just that bad. I posted that letter on a private Facebook page aimed at just a few hundred close friends and colleagues I had from school and more than 15 years of social justice work. The letter went immediately viral. And for several months, I engaged the hopeful space that it created. I even began to think that America was my country still. I began to reconstruct my path through America, though, recalling my experience in each place I'd lived, studied, worked, or worshipped, looking for the redemption of America in my memories. Surely there was a place where we could be safe. I found that color lines, and especially the forced migrations through which they have been drawn, are the defining feature of America's topography. This book is my recollection of each place in America I've spent time in, and my investigations of America's forced migrations to and from those places in the service of an ongoing colonial project. So, the couple of facts that it might be helpful to sort of to round out that picture are that when I wrote that letter in December of 2015, I was a mom to a 3 and a 5-year-old, and I was living in suburban Bucks County, which is a bellwether county for American elections. What happens there is thought to be a predictor of what will happen everywhere else. My husband and I had recently moved back with our 2 young children from Illinois to live close to my parents. And my parents had immigrated to the United States from Pakistan in the 1960s, actually via Canada. So this was the dream, 3 generations all in one place. We were so thrilled to be together, and we thought that that would lead to many more generations all in that same place. I had been a social justice lawyer by then for about 15 years. So I thought I knew what I needed to know about race in America and about civil rights history. But it turned out, as I began to investigate the 12 American towns that I called home all over the country, that I had been taught civil rights and American history broadly in the same way that so many of us are, as these like sort of pin drop moments that carry a certain narrative. And the writing of A Good Country was the undoing of that narrative. So I'll end there for the introductions. So I think we're starting with a couple of mutual questions, right, Lunden? We thought,
Yes, and I get to start by asking you. Are you ready for your
ready.
question?
I'm ready. Yeah.
When you first envisioned writing this book, did you picture it as a braided narrative? And how or why did it end up as a braided narrative?
So A Good Country started as a braided narrative, and it's really a form that I was used to. I really had been deeply formed by that feminist principle that the personal is political. And so the political essay, deeply grounded in who the author is, had always been very compelling to me. And actually, absent information about who the author is, I find political arguments very difficult to take. I want to know who it is that I'm hearing from, what their story is, and what compels them to tell the story that they're telling. I was really influenced by Dr. Sandra Steingraber, I believe her name is, who wrote Having Faith. Let me just, an ecologist's journey to motherhood. I always have to read the subtitle. Which was an early version of creative nonfiction that we hadn't really seen much of before her. She did this beautiful job of telling the story of her pregnancy from the perspective of an ecologist and sort of talking about how the environment was influencing in great detail what was happening in the ecology, how it was affecting the ecology of her own body. It was just so brilliantly and compellingly done. And so yeah, it never occurred to me to think of A Good Country in any way other than keeping the record of my own exploration. And in fact, that's how it started. Like I literally went looking for the stories of these color lines and then realized for a particular reason, and then realized that if I didn't know them, many other people probably lacked access to those stories as well. So that this was the record of that exploration. So I'm going to ask you the same question.
You don't even have to ask. Can I leap in?
Dive in.
Because it's so funny that you brought up Sandra Steingraber, because I was thinking about her today. I was sort of mulling over, how questions were just going through my head of what we would be talking about. And I started thinking about Sandra Steingraber because I was thinking about, well, I'm going to back up and say that I started researching American Breakdown. And I don't know if we gave the subtitle anywhere, so I'm just going to say it now because it sort of gives because it's a braided memoir, it sort of gives a good encapsulation of what the book is. American Breakdown, Our Ailing Nation, My Body's Revolt, and the 19th-Century Woman Who Brought Me Back to Life. And that's Alice James. That title came, I had a different title. That title came like very close to publication time. And I started researching it in 2001 and started writing it in 2007. And creative nonfiction is it's a newer genre, and lyric essays and braided narratives are even newer. And and when I started, I wasn't really aware of braided narratives. I knew that I wanted to write a book about my illness and about Alice James and about some of the contexts of my illness, which is known as myalgic encephalomyelitis / chronic fatigue syndrome, or MECFS. And so I had a sense of what I wanted to write, but I didn't know it was going to be a braided memoir. And reading, this is the part where that I was thinking about today, was that reading Sandra Steingraber's book, Living Downstream, which is about her getting bladder cancer at like the age of 21 or some very young age. And bladder cancer is always or almost always related to chemicals that our bodies are taking in that they shouldn't. And she lived downstream from some kind of factory that was polluting the water that she swam in, I think, and drank. It's a long time ago since I read it, but I read it and I was like, I finally found somebody who's doing what I want to do. And then I think just reading essays, the braided essays, and I ended up writing a braided essay without even knowing. I mean, it's just, to me, it comes really naturally because I don't think in a linear way. And it just seems to me like the easiest way to write. And especially when you're writing a complex narrative that blends personal and the political.
Beautiful. I have some more questions for you, Lunden. I
Okay.
always have questions for you, Lunden.
Yeah.
All right. So I've actually heard you tell the story, that story of finding the book about Alice James a couple of times, and how she suffered from neurasthenia, which has some similarities to MECFS as the origin story of you writing American Breakdown. But not everyone who finds that book that relates to them then launches into the incredible research that you've done to try and understand the links between Alice James' story and your own, and then to open that up into sort of the world of medicine and how it's shaped in our country and how it misses so much about women's ailments particularly. So what I want is that bit that comes after finding the book on Alice James. I want what turned that moment into the project of American Breakdown for you.
Well, when I found the book, I think I read that it was 1998, I think. So I was just starting my master's in social work program, and didn't have time. I mean, I was immediately curious to know whether Alice's illness and mine, whether anybody had researched or considered that they might be the same thing. But I was too busy with my own work to really delve into it until 2001, when I started getting closer to graduation. I went to school part-time because of my illness. And so, yes, I mentioned in the reading, the research librarian, who was like such a gift. You know, I went in there and I was like, I want to explore these connections. Can you help me get a start? And she gave me some papers. And then the great thing is, like, you can go down to the end notes and then there's more and more and more. And it was just so thrilling. And I'd been a writer, like, in high school. And I always felt like a writer. I stopped a lot of writing when I got sick because I was too sick. I was too sick. And I was too depressed by how weak my body was. There were times I couldn't even hold up a book. So writing really got backburnered. But then reading the Alice James biography and getting curious about that question, but also getting fired up because of the feeling of kinship that I had with her. In some ways, that kinship is part of what sustained me in this long process of writing the book. And I think the other part of my answer is that MECFS, which was first called chronic fatigue syndrome, was really denigrated by the CDC and poorly funded by the CDC and the NIH, and that trickled down to the media. It was called yuppie flu. My first doctor told me I was just depressed and the best thing for me would be to get back to work. Over the many years that I've been living with this illness, I know from many other people in the community, it's just common to be dismissed by doctors. And now people who are dealing with long COVID, they're in a better situation than we were in 1989 when I first got sick, but it still ain't good. It's bad. And it's traumatizing when your doctor dismisses you or tells you you just need to go see a psychiatrist or get therapy or here's an anti-anxiety med, when you know in your body, and you know something's not right. And it's traumatizing. And I really feel like that trauma was the fire under my ass to keep me driven. And it made me want to tell a story that just wasn't just a personal story, but that was a story that would convince doctors, researchers, and skeptics, which is why the book looks way thicker than it is, because there are like 70 pages of footnotes, endnotes, to sort of back up peer-reviewed articles backing up my arguments and stories. And so I've lost my thread, but I think it's
Well, here, let me jump in because actually
okay.
this question for you is related. So you did this incredible thing of deciding to research really complicated areas of medicine and science. And I've heard you say that you're bad at science, which blows my mind, because when you read, no one reading American Breakdown would say, this woman who's discussing chaos theory in a way that I can understand is bad at science. So what was it that made you then feel like, not only am I going to tell this personal story, not only am I going to write this research book, but I'm going to walk into the world of scientific research, make myself, if not an expert, then someone with an ability to synthesize all of this really complicated information,
Yeah.
and then braid it with my own experience. That's not a small undertaking. So what prepared you to sort of enter that world of scientific research, and what made you brave enough to engage those difficult subjects? And then also, like, what were your strategies? How did you do that? Were you doing interviews? Were you reading papers? When did you hit roadblocks, and what did you do to get around them?
So as a human and as a, and trained as a social worker, and I was a therapist for 15 years, mental health stuff and sociology, history, those things are all pretty easy for me. I love reading that stuff. It goes in. I have a terrible memory for facts of any kind, which is why I'm a writer. And but science, I never did well in science, even like when I was trying. It's very hard for me. My mind just sort of flips off if things get too challenging. But in service of my own book's mission, I had to, because I didn't want to just write about psychology. That was the problem, is that everybody was psychologizing my illness, and I knew it was biological. I knew there was a biological element, if not a full biological basis. And what I came to realize and understand is that, to me, all illnesses are biopsychosocial. So biopsychosocial is a term that I learned at studying social work. Biological, psychological, social. There's a context within which we're all living, and it affects our health. And industrial capitalism has a negative effect on our health. And America's particularly rapacious form of industrial capitalism. I was able to find data. I mean, I got curious about that stuff, and then I was able to find data about like the impact of stress for all of us. And why do we live under so much stress? Because we live under capitalism. And in the end, we don't matter. The ones who matter are the shareholders and the people with money. And then because of that, we're all like, the cost of living has gone up. The minimum wage hasn't gone up in, I can't say a fact, but a very long time. And so we're actually, I can say one fact. I think it's the date 1973. That's when a shift started to happen, when our productivity continued to go up, but the amount of money that we were earning started going down. Some of that was because of unions we used to have really great unions, and they've by the 1980s, Reagan was really shooting down the unions, and we have a small percentage compared to what we used to. Now listen to me, I'm going off onto like the subject of stress and the subject of unions. How the heck does that even relate to ME/CFS or neurasthenia? And it relates in the bigger picture of that we're all living in these bodies that are oppressed by industrial capitalism, and industrial capitalism was really hitting its stride during Alice's time. And so now I need a reminder of the bad at science. Yeah, I did. Okay. So I went off on that on the bad at science question.
I mean, I think what's really interesting is that it's like you followed that thread of the social reality of how medicine was addressing or failing to address the position you were in, and so many others like you have been in over the years. And that inevitably led to sort of an inquiry into why medicine was being approached the way it was being approached. And I think what is so brilliant about this book as a braided memoir is that the braiding allowed you to bring in your personal experience, the psychological, the social, and then the scientific. And I won't say any spoilers, but your book wraps up with a really just a really beautiful incorporation of scientific theory that helps point the direction forward in a way that I think is really unpredictable. And were it not for the braiding, I don't think you could have arrived there. So it really, I feel like, and I mean, I'd love to hear from you what you think of this. I really feel like it's a situation where the form really was in service to your inquiry in a very specific way.
Yeah, and it's like part of the process of researching informed the form, and the process, and then the form and what I was learning in the process of researching informed what else I was researching, and sort of I got really interested in chaos theory and fractals, and like the most simple thing I can say to explain chaos theory is that we've all heard of the butterfly effect, and that's the idea that something small that happens, like maybe in the weather in Texas, can trigger a hurricane in Japan. And now some researchers are beginning to look at how that impacts the body, how that can be used as a way to look at the body, which is just so vastly different from the Cartesian mind-body split, which is the way that medicine has foundationally been and has been great for us in many ways, but I feel like it's limited, especially for people with complex multi-system illnesses like mine. And so when you have doctors and researchers who aren't asking the right questions and who are telling you it's all in your head and you're not actually sick and you should go back to work, then it forces you and your illness comrades to become citizen scientists. So that's why I had to write science. I had to write science because the powers haven't been doing the right science, and haven't been funded to do enough of the science.
I feel like you're right on the edge of answering my next question, so I'm gonna ask it to see if I can draw out the rest of it. Was it really a book directed exclusively at the medical establishment, or what was the sort of big picture effect that you hope American Breakdown would have and will continue to have in the society?
I knew that I wanted to reach other people like me who had complex multi-system illnesses like chronic fatigue syndrome. I also wrote about multiple chemical sensitivity, which I also had to deal with for a long time. It's improved quite a lot, thankfully, but it's very, it can be really disabling. Some people can't even live in, quote, civilization because of all the chemicals that we can't escape from. And then other illnesses like long COVID, which was just starting to happen as I was just finishing the book. But anybody who was living with chronic fatigue syndrome could have predicted that long COVID was coming. Now I've lost, please give me a little reminder of your question.
I was asking about what the effect was that you would hope.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I wanted to reach my people and help them feel not alone and help them feel, I wanted them to feel advocated for, and have their experience reflected. But on a macro level, I want to reach healthcare providers. I'd love for medical students to study this book and learn more. The thing about it being braided is that they get to read my story, which to me, the braided narrative creates a connection between the mind and the body, or the head and the heart. Or it reveals the connection that's always there. And so they can read a story like mine and I think, and I hope, feel like, oh my God, this poor woman that time, that was really awful. She was really let down. I don't want to be like that. I'm going to keep reading and learn from her because clearly she has something to say. And, so I have a radical hope for a cultural shift. And of course, I'm not the only person who's writing about chronic illness and the ways that there can be changes made. So hopefully there's a movement happening.
You started to touch on this when you said that by the time you were wrapping up the writing, COVID was rocking all of our worlds.
Yeah.
And I wanted to bring up that the process of you writing American Breakdown start to finish was 20 years with a lot of work life in there, a lot of changes in health, a lot of, I assume, moves and life happenings. So I want to ask a couple of questions about that. One is, and I'll repeat them later, so you don't have to hold them both at the same time. One is, during that 20 years, were there any big shifts that really changed in any substantial way what you were trying to say about the medical establishment? Or did you feel like the problems were so persistent that passage of time really didn't impact what the central, I mean, I assume that there were small changes, but didn't really impact the central thrust of your book, which was this sort of critical view of the limitations of Western medicine?
Yeah, I can answer that part right now and say there weren't enough. I did have to. Problem with writing a book that takes 20 years is you have to go back and update some of the research. So I did have to do a little bit of that, but the fundamental changes, there weren't. I didn't have to change a lot in terms of the problems with the healthcare system, and I would imagine that in some ways it's worse than it was when I started.
Then I guess my other question about 20 years is it requires a level of persistence and tenacity to carry a project of this magnitude for that long. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about investing in this project as a form of activism for that span of time and what that took. Were there times that you were ready to throw in the towel? What kept you going?
Yeah. I guess I want to say I'm blessed with tenacity. I mean, it's just part of who I am. I mean, the opposite pole of tenacity is stubbornness, I think. And but tenacity, you kind of have to be tenacious to be a writer. I mean, it's just, I mean, you can be a writer, but if you want to get published and and you have to be tenacious, and you can't let a no mean that you're going to stop. Um and I'll also say that I was really encouraged in my writing by my parents and also by my teachers when I was in high school and even grade school. And like got published once or twice when I was quite, very young. And that kind of stuff really helps to support somebody to be tenacious, because it helps you believe in yourself on a fundamental level, even when you get a rejection. And so there's that. I mean, I was just determined I was going to write this book and I was going to get it published. Um, and I also felt like, I mean, I have to figure out a way to write a book. It's about this illness that's just like hard and depressing, which is ME/CFS, about this other illness, neurasthenia, that nobody's heard of. This woman, Alice James, who you have to explain that she was the sister of the writer Henry James and the psychologist William James. How the heck do you make a book like that be something people want to read? And so that was part of my thinking the whole time that I was writing, is like, I need to make this a story. I need to make this compelling. And so there's all that. But then there did come a point around 2015 when I was so done. I wasn't even halfway finished the book after I'd been working on it since 2001. It was such slow going trying to fit it in with my job and my energy limits and the amount of research that it took, because like I'm not an expert, and I wasn't an expert in most of the things that the book has in it. And so at that point, and though I'm not somebody who sort of quits easily, I'm pretty focused on doing what I want to do. I allowed myself to consider letting it go. All I wanted to do was write essays. I just wanted to be free. It was like this albatross around my neck. And I was like, but I've been put all these years in. Could I really I let myself consider it, and it felt good to let myself consider it. And then I sort of looked at some of what I had, and I felt like this is too good to let go. I've invested too much time and energy. But what I need is support. I need help. And that's when I began applying for grants and residencies. And that was like a turning point, because I got accepted to 2 residencies the first year that I applied, and 1 small grant. And that told me, people say this is worth investing in. They're investing in me. And so I'm just going to keep doing this. So that's how I was able to finish.
That's really interesting. I wonder if that affirmation was partly an affirmation ever of the art as activism, or of the social justice content of what you were writing. Was that part of it? I mean, was that part of the drive for you, or was that part of the outside affirmation that you got?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess there is the piece that writing about this illness for me is a very strong form of activism, and that people would support a book that's about ME/CFS felt important. I knew it's harder to get books published that are illness memoirs, or at least I've been told that. So I think that helped me feel supported in moving forward with this book. This book is a form of activism.
Okay, I have a last question for you, which is it's a big question, so it might take a long time to answer, but what do you feel, if you had to narrow it down, I guess, because I imagine that there are a lot of answers to this question. What do you know, having written American Breakdown, about yourself? We've talked about writing as a form of self-exploration. So
Right.
You and I before. So what is it that you know about yourself? What is it that you learned about yourself through the process of writing American Breakdown that you would not have learned otherwise?
That could be a long answer, but I'm going to answer with relatively short part. And then I have to think more about the longer, all the many tendrils of that. But something that's happened that I think is related to getting the book out, finishing it, getting it out into the world. I am friendlier with strangers, which doesn't sound like, what does that have to do with anything? But I'm like a real introvert. I like don't like I don't talk to strangers because I'm afraid they don't want to talk to me. I don't want to bother anybody. I also don't want to be drained. I don't want my energy drained by somebody if they're going to talk about something that's hard or that I'm not interested in talking about. Whatever. I mean, it's just introvert stuff. And but something's shifted. I just feel like more fully in my power and my identity. It's like the book helped me become who I am. It helped the book, yeah, or help me realize who I am. I don't know. It's like a full realization of who I am, and now I'm like fully. I get to be fully me, which is great. And and apparently, as fully me, I'm able to be more outgoing and friendly with strangers. But that's great.
Amazing. It makes so much sense.
So we gotta move. We gotta talk about you and your book. I can't wait to hear you talk.
Ask away, ask away.
Okay. So right. So you, in writing about all these towns and cities that you lived in, you say that you didn't go in knowing that digging into these events would lead you to find threads connecting them all to a bigger theme. What didn't you know when you started writing A Good Country? Could you say more about what you learned?
So I touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but so I started with 12 American towns that I called home. And I happen to live all over the country, although there's a little bit of a concentration in the mid-Atlantic Northeast where I grew up. So I had a fairly in one place or in one region childhood, and then the other towns are all over the place. What I didn't know when I went looking for the color lines, honest to God, did not know, was that each event creating an apartheid like color line or segregation that I experienced personally, and I tell you in the book, each of the chapters in the book is a town, and I tell you in the book the color line I tripped over in one way or another. And then I go and research the history of that color line. I talk about how it got there. And those stories were, in some cases, had a familiar through line. We know part of that story popularly. I didn't anticipate how much of the story was missing from that popular through line and how much that context changed the overall picture of would change the overall picture I had of American history. Part of the reason for that is that each of those stories connected to a regional or a national movement that was happening at the time. So these weren't an individual pogrom or an individual case of arson or the creation of a sundown town or a particular forced migration. These were typically attached to larger movements. So I'll give you an example. I tell the story early in the book of the creation of the very first residential school, is what they're called. They really were concentration camps for Native children. And the first one was established in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And I'd have to, it was there in existence for about 100 years. That's just one valley over from where I grew up. Had no idea it had ever existed. But there were more than 100 such residential schools across the country. It just so happened that they started on the Eastern Seaboard because at that time, the elimination, both by ethnic cleansing and by the spread of illness, but also by violence of Native people across the country, had been so extreme on the Eastern coast by then. The idea was that young children taken, displaced from their homes and put in residential schools on the Eastern Seaboard would not be able to find their way back to their families because the distance would be too long. So there were children being taken from the Great Plains at this point and brought to Carlisle. So even the story of that single school related to a national movement that was really about child separation. It was really about the internment and the cultural genocide of Native people across the country. And so, you know, I might have known a piece, but the larger picture was always so surprising. And then towards the end of my project, what I did was I took, if you can imagine, I told probably 30, 35 stories that start with a little seed and then expand in that way to this greater context. When I put all of those movements, in fact, just all of those moments back to back on a timeline, they stretch from before America was America all the way up until today. And then I made a map and I plotted all the towns that were implicated in the stories I ended up telling. Because, of course, there were the 12 towns, but then the larger stories brought in many, many other places. And the dots on the map, when I mapped them all, stretched from border to border and sea to sea. And so that meant that A Good Country was a very different book than I thought I was writing when I began.
What did you think you were writing?
I really thought it was genuinely an investigation. I didn't have a conclusion when I began.
Yeah.
I genuinely was taking readers, my mission was to take readers along for the ride that I was going on as someone, I was a social justice lawyer. So I mean, I was I was an activist, but I was committed to this idea that the moral arc was bending towards justice, if only we stuck with it. And I would like to say that I still believe that, but to the extent I do, I believe we need to do a whole lot more active bending of that arc,
Yeah.
because and we need to put a lot more of a spotlight on the folks who are actively trying to keep that arc from bending, because I really, that guided my work every day as a social justice lawyer. I've worked in some of America's poorest communities, represented some of America's most vulnerable citizens, and I really, really counted on that belief every day when I did my work. And I think one of the things that really shifted for me was that I realized that the not bending of that arc is written quite deeply into our law and policy, and it's built quite deeply into our infrastructure, where our highways are placed, how our suburban neighborhoods are built, where our schools are positioned, where our food deserts are, where we allow mining to take place. Speaking of ecology, all of these things are deeply racialized, and deeply in the service of preserving, to be very frank, a white wealthy center. So yeah, I don't know if that, I kind of got away from your question there a little, as we are wont to do in our conversation.
Yeah, and it resonated, that part about, like, I went in, like, I had an idea of things I wanted to say, but I had no idea the like final outcome. And that, as we said, like, the process of researching the book and shaping it forms things that we didn't even expect. And both of us, it sounds like we're bringing the reader along with us as we're learning this stuff. So I wanted to talk with you a little more about your personal experience. Your parents moved to Canada from Pakistan and then moved to the US, where you were born. And I'm wondering if you can talk about diaspora in the context of your book. And is there something in the crafting of a braided memoir that is reflective of diaspora?
So I'll take the second question first. I do think that there's something about braided memoir that reflects diaspora. I think we have a particular, in America, in the United States, we really have a unique situation where expressing our identities, expressing where we're from, is critical to understanding what our voice is, because we all come from such different places. We all have different stories about the experience that we're coming out of, and the cultural sort of forms that shape our identities, how we function, what we value. And so a braided memoir allows one to kind of ground the reader in that reality of self. And I mean, I will say I'm a little bit suspicious when that's not there. And I think I touched on this earlier, because I feel like what that is almost an expression of neutrality that I don't trust, or an expression of a normative stance or teller of story that I don't trust. And so I really do believe that in this situation of diaspora, where we don't have a sort of predictable, mutual worldview, it's essential for us to tell that story. And I think that's true for everyone. I think that we need to reject the idea that there is a normative American, because, and this is the second part of the answer, we're in this incredible social experiment. And I don't know that it's a very good one. I say that with a smile on my face, but it's not, it wasn't a very thought out experiment. It certainly isn't discussed as an experiment. So we, in the last 500 years of European colonialism, are experiencing a level of population mobility that we don't really understand what's at the end of. We don't know what the product is of many people leaving the deep culture of their indigenous homes and moving en masse to other places. We don't really know what that does to people. And we're hoping that that level of cosmopolitanism is something that will be, on the whole, good. We just don't quite know what loss of indigeneity at that level does. And then to make it more complicated, many of the places that we're moving to are places that were established in a very explicitly colonial project. This was a small group of European people who said that land should be ours and not the place of the indigenous people who live there. And so you have this sort of experiment happening on an origin story that's quite devastating. Mm-hmm. And we're not really excavating that. And so I would say that my sort of orientation is, you can't have justice without truth. You have to tell the truth first, and then figure out what you're going to do with this experiment that we're all in the middle of. Certainly, we're not going to reverse the experiment. No one's going anywhere. You know, we're all here. This is the reality that we were born into, but certainly we can do a better job of actually having that conversation with one another. Yes. And figuring out what we want the next step to look like.
Yeah. And that makes me think, I mean, what you said made me think, like, so I pulled a quote from your book that it just hit me in this like deep way. It's like, oh, I hadn't thought of it this way. You wrote, migration alone is staggering in its complexity. The loss of cohesive identity, culture, language, lineage, but forced migration is something else entirely. America is a case study in the forced migrations of Black and Brown people, often relentlessly enacted against the same group, so that generations later, entire peoples are left to reconstruct who they are or might become from only the shards that remain. And I see you're wearing a keffiyeh, and I imagine that this has been on your mind a lot as we stand powerlessly by as America funds the genocide in Palestine. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I would be happy to. I'm really grateful for that question, because I think our books really reference the world around us, and it would be hard to have any public conversation in this moment without addressing what's being live streamed to all of our devices. So the connection between a good country and what's happening right now to Palestinians is that there are some predictable, if horrific, eventualities of settler colonial projects. It's as true in America as it is in Israel today. when you have an unexamined project that starts out with the premise that one group of people is more entitled to a place and to resources than another, the endpoint of that is not a beautiful endpoint. It is an endpoint that results in a number of strategies that are predictable across the board. And in a good country, I name many of those strategies. So we see child separation, which we've already talked about in the context of residential schools, but also happened when young enslaved Africans were trafficked by Thomas Jefferson and the elite of Virginia to the new slave states of the Deep South. You know, there was a point where tobacco had so depleted the land in Virginia that the land itself was no longer profitable. And so the people became the commodity, and children were separated specifically for that purpose, right? So child separation. And, you know, we've seen that with the mass incarceration of Palestinian children over time. We see starvation, you know, the story of the Native American genocide is very much a story driven by taking people away from subsistence land use and making sure that they were reliant on government rations so that they could be moved or manipulated at will. And, you know, we see mass starvation right now in Gaza. You know, another example is simply the transfer of populations. I talk in the book about the Armed Occupation Act, which of 1842, which was in Florida. So what had happened was that the Seminole were a reconstituted group of Native people from Native folks who were pushed out of the southeastern United States. They found themselves in Florida. Right? Simultaneously, there were enslaved people from South Carolina and from Georgia who were escaping into Florida. And they became known as Maroons or as Black Seminoles, some of them kind of integrated with Seminole communities. So the population of Florida, even as late as the mid-1800s, was, you know, a group of Seminole and Maroon and Black Seminole communities that were trading with Cuban fishermen, that were, you know, negotiating with the British, negotiating with the Spanish. This is actually, when we think of our ideal for American society, 1850s Florida, before Andrew Jackson had to go with them, that was it, or early 1800s Florida. It was quite an amazing place. And what happened actually was that there were a series of wars, 3 wars, known as the Seminole Wars, where Andrew Jackson, as first as a general, led attacks to decimate those communities. And then on the Trail of Tears, pushed those communities out over land and over sea into Oklahoma, which was then known as Indian country. And the idea at that time was that there would be a line where colonization stopped, and then that would be native land. And of course, we know that those boundaries got blown through over and over again out of greed, mostly land speculation, greed. And then what happened was that the Armed Occupation Act was passed, offering any armed white man an opportunity to go and have 100 acres in Florida, cost-free, so long as he agreed to actually reside there for 5 years and clear at least 5 acres. So we have, like, you know, a really clear example of population replacement. And again, we're seeing that in the case of Gaza, in the West Bank, certainly with settler communities. And so there are really deep connections. And I think, you know, in some ways, I'm grateful that A Good Country's conclusion ended the way it did, which is drawing some of the connections between settler colonial societies that are choosing a somewhat different path. One of the reasons my family and I ended up in Canada is because if you go to the Department of Justice website for Canada today, there's a statement that Canada, the Canadian government, has the intention to decolonize. It's something, I mean, America is just nowhere near that place as a matter of policy. And is it lip service? Is it really going to happen? Is Canada very far away from that point right now? Of course. But the intention to look honestly, to tell the truth about the past makes justice possible.
Yeah.
It opens the potential for social justice. So I see many parallels, and I also see that there are societies that might shine the way forward, that might shine a spotlight on the possibilities for the way forward.
So that I was thinking as you were talking about, I mean, you said it so beautifully, and now I can't remember the quote, but it's basically that, like, we can't make ourselves, this country, America, a better country. And it's the same for Canada. We can't make ourselves better countries if we aren't willing to face the truth. And so we have to speak and write the true history, not the glossed over happy history about how, like, we came over, we white people came over here and, like, tilled the soil and made this amazing country, while we totally ignore the harms that were done to other people as we were doing that. And I'm thinking back to this question that I feel like you already asked me, about the effect that you hope the book will have on in the world. And in a way, like you already said, like, to me, like, your book is it's giving us the truth, like, right there. And when I read it, I was just like, holy crap. Like, I knew it was bad, but I didn't know it was this bad. I mean, I knew about some of these things, but I didn't know, like, one story you tell, and you can maybe briefly, because we're running low on time, but I was thinking about school integration, and it seemed like something good was happening, and then something bad happened. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah. So I'll say two things. One is that I want to just bring in something you and I have talked about off camera several times, which is that, I think we can talk about this. Certainly there's a place to talk about this in terms of whiteness and brownness and blackness. But the reality is that I believe that the term whiteness, or the idea of whiteness, is an unfortunate tool of colonization, and that we all actually have a connection to deep culture at some point, whatever the color of our skin is. And that actually it's a disservice to each of us to disconnect us from that deep culture. And that if we're able to engage with one another, either on the basis of that deep culture or on what it feels like to lose that connection to deep culture, that there's a level of humanity that we reach that allows for reconciliation and allows for reparation. I mean, I'll just give you an example. When we were at a conference together recently, you and I, Lunden, and I was talking to an old friend of yours, a writer friend, and he and his wife are of Irish descent. And his wife told a story about her Irish ancestors and how they ended up in Kansas City. And I thought to myself, gosh, that is not a lot different than an immigration story you might hear about a South Asian person. It really is not. An orphan climbing into the hold of a ship because there was nothing left for them in their home country. And, maybe family had died of disease or had experienced colonial famine. Those stories are very similar. Mm-hmm. And if we reclaim those stories, there is so much hope and potential in the unity that comes from shared humanity. I really believe that. So again, I lost your question in the middle of all of that.
I think that's the end. I love that ending. Let's leave it there.
Thank you so much for those questions. They were fantastic.
And thank you. It's
always
so
such a
fun
pleasure
to talk to you. Yeah.
Thank you both. Thank you so much, Sophia. Thank you so much, Lunden. That was really, really fantastic. These topics are obviously so important and so timely. And so I really am grateful that you gave us this opportunity to highlight your books and to have these conversations. It was also great to see how braided memoir as a form can be such a powerful tool to talk about the political and the personal together. I think that's really great. And it's really important for us at Get Lit to show the power of storytelling to spark important conversations and facilitate learning and positive change. So thank you again, Lunden and Sophia, for presenting such an impactful event today. I would also like to thank Liz, our assistant coordinator as well at the festival, for all of her hard work this year and for all of the interns that we have helping us behind the scenes as well. For everyone at home who would like to learn more about these writers and their books, you can visit our website, getlitfestival.org. Remember that these virtual events are free to access on our YouTube channel, along with dozens of events from previous festivals as well. If you would like to join us next year in 2025, which will again include both in-person and virtual events, please consider sending us a submission. We're open for submissions from May 1st to September 1st at getlit.submittable.com. And that's how we got Sophia and Lunden here with us today. So thank you again for submitting this event. And thank you again for joining us. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.